There are confessions that do not sound like apologies, but like hymns. Keith Urban's came softly, wrapped in the quiet dignity of a man who has lived long enough to see his own reflection change. At 57, sitting alone in a Nashville studio with the lights dimmed to gold, he finally spoke of love. Not the kind that sells records, but the kind that breaks and rebuilds you until you no longer need the illusion of forever. For decades, he had been the smiling golden boy of country music. Blue eyes, leather boots, a voice that made pain sound romantic. To the world, he was the dreamer who had conquered America and captured the heart of Nicole Kidman, the porcelain queen of Hollywood. They were the embodiment of destiny, two stars who found each other across continents, both marked by fame, both searching for peace. But fame has a way of turning love into theater. It takes something sacred and puts it under glass, asking it to breathe without oxygen. Keith and Nicole had been married for nearly 2 decades, a miracle in a world that devours its own idols. From red carpets to award shows, they looked inseparable. Yet beneath the smiles, there was always a quiet tremor, an unseen cost. Every note he sang on stage carried the weight of nights spent apart. Every applause hit a heartbeat that missed home. He would later admit that even in the middle of sold-out arenas, he sometimes felt like he was performing inside a cage made of sound. Fame, he once said, isn't freedom, it's just a louder kind of loneliness. So, when Keith finally spoke the truth about his marriage, it wasn't scandal that came spilling out, it was grace. "I loved her more than I knew how to," he confessed. And sometimes love changes shape. It doesn't die, it just stops needing to prove itself. The world expected drama, betrayal, something sensational. What they got instead was a man telling the truth about what it means to love and the long shadow of perfection. The story that followed, his rise, his demons, his devotion, his breaking, isn't just about one marriage. It's about the journey of a soul learning how to stay open even after being shattered by fame. It's about the small-town boy from Caboolture who wanted nothing more than to play guitar and ended up learning that every chord of success comes with a note of sacrifice. At 57, Keith Urban is no longer chasing applause. He's chasing honesty. He's no longer singing to be adored. He's singing to be understood. And as he strums his guitar in that quiet Nashville room, you can hear it, the sound of a man who has stopped performing for the world and started speaking to eternity. This is not the story of a fall from grace, it's the story of a man who finally decided to live without pretending. And this right here is where the melody begins. A confession wrapped in music, a truth that took a lifetime to learn. Long before the spotlight ever found him, before Nashville, before stadiums screamed his name, there was a boy sitting cross-legged on the rough carpet of a small Australian house, tracing the frets of a guitar with trembling fingers. The air smelled of dust and eucalyptus. Outside, cicadas sang like they were keeping time for him. Inside, Keith Lionel Urban, the son of Robert and Mary Ann, was learning that music could be both an escape and a mirror. He was born in Whangarei, New Zealand on October 26, 1967, but grew up in Caboolture, a quiet working-class town in Queensland. His father sold instruments part-time. His mother loved country records, and their home pulsed with the heartbeat of the American sound. Glenn Campbell, Don Williams, Merle Haggard. Voices from faraway lands drifted through the walls like sermons for a restless child. Keith didn't just hear the songs, he saw them. The stories, the ache, the grit.
They taught him that even ordinary lives could sound extraordinary if you played them right. At 4, he picked up a ukulele. At 6, a guitar. His father told him, "If you want the world to listen, make it feel you." Keith did. He practiced until his fingers blistered, then practiced more. When he couldn't afford new strings, he learned to make broken ones sing. Every evening, the family's tiny living room became a stage, his parents clapping, neighbors listening through thin walls. He wasn't dreaming of fame yet. He was dreaming of belonging, of a place where the music inside him matched the world around him. School was harder. He was shy, awkward, sometimes teased for his accent or his obsession with American cowboy music. While other kids played rugby, he memorized guitar solos. Teachers said he was distracted. His classmates called him strange. But the strings never judged him. They became his first true friends.
Music, he once said, was the only language I didn't stutter in. By the age of 9, he was entering local talent shows, singing covers of country songs with a voice too soft for his size, but too honest to ignore. The judges smiled. His parents beamed. But even when he won, Keith didn't celebrate. He went home, sat by his window, and replayed every mistake, every missed note, determined to be better. That perfectionism, both his gift and his curse, began young. When he was 12, his father mortgaged their modest home to buy him a top-quality guitar. A bold, perhaps reckless gesture of faith. "Make it count," his father said. He never forgot. He spent hours after school watching Chet Atkins videos, copying licks until his fingers cramped. While his friends chased girls, he chased tone. The instrument became a sanctuary from everything he didn't understand about the world. By the age of 15, he was playing in local bars, the youngest musician in rooms filled with smoke, laughter, and regret. He was too young to drink, too old to be a dreamer. Night after night, he stood on sticky floors, singing to half-interested strangers who clapped out of habit more than admiration. But even then, he performed as if the universe itself was listening. "You learn who you are on those nights," he later said. "You learn whether you're doing this for love or applause." It was in those dark pubs that he found the first fragments of himself, the poet hidden inside the performer. He learned to make sadness sound beautiful, to turn longing into melody, to turn silence into rhythm. Every chord he struck was a rebellion against smallness, against invisibility. He wasn't running from home, he was running toward the life he felt waiting somewhere far away. When the final school bell rang and his friends scattered toward safe jobs and steady lives, Keith packed a suitcase, a guitar, and a map covered in possibility. He kissed his mother's cheek, hugged his father tight, and whispered, "I'll make it worth it." Then he left Caboolture with nothing but faith, faith that music could save him from disappearing. He didn't know then that it would save him again and again, from loneliness, from failure, from himself. Nashville. The word alone sounded like prophecy. To a boy from Caboolture, it was the promised land, a place where people turned pain into poetry and called it country music. But when Keith Urban finally arrived there in 1992, the dream looked different up close. It wasn't golden. It was gritty, hard, and humbling. He was 24, broke and unknown. The streets were filled with musicians chasing the same miracle. Every bar, every open mic was a battlefield of hope. He slept in cheap apartments with thin walls where the hum of air conditioners mixed with the hum of guitars. He recorded demos for other singers, played backup for artists who barely noticed him, and sold his instruments more than once to pay rent. But even when money ran out, the music didn't. He carried it inside him like oxygen. It's not ambition that keeps you alive, it's hunger, pure hunger. Keith's early years in Nashville were a trial by fire. He formed a band called The Ranch, 3 men bound by desperation and a shared dream.
They played smoky bars, county fairs, anywhere that would pay in beer or applause. Crowds were small, indifferent, but Keith played every note like he was already famous. The nights bled into each other, loading gear at dawn, writing songs in motel rooms, staring at ceilings that leaked. When exhaustion came, he drowned it in whiskey, a habit that felt harmless at first. The loneliness of the road can make a man believe in false friends, and the bottle was his most loyal companion. In 1999, after nearly a decade of struggle, the dam finally broke. His self-titled American debut album, Keith Urban, hit the radio like a revelation. His voice was different. Not twangy like traditional country, not polished like pop. It was raw, tender, and electric. Songs like But for the Grace of God and Where the Blacktop Ends became anthems for dreamers who were tired of pretending. The critics called him the new face of country, but what they really meant was that he sounded human again. Fame began to flicker at the edges. The ACM named him top new male vocalist. The CMA handed him the Horizon Award. He smiled, but inside he was terrified. For the first time, he had something to lose. The industry that once ignored him now expected him to be perfect. Every lyric was scrutinized, every performance judged. The applause was louder, but so was the pressure. He spent endless nights in studios chasing the sound that had made him famous, the mix of country grit and rock soul that no one could quite copy. But fame, like fire, needs fuel. When inspiration ran low, he turned again to the bottle. The same passion that made him magnetic on stage became destructive off it. He laughed louder, partied harder, worked longer, all to quiet the gnawing doubt that he didn't deserve any of it. Then there was the night that changed everything. A charity event in Los Angeles, 2005. The crowd shimmered with stars, but none burned brighter than the woman who walked past him, Nicole Kidman. She was elegance, wrapped in quiet sadness, a contrast of power and fragility. He introduced himself with a shy grin, and she smiled back with the kind of warmth that melts armor. She didn't see the fame, Keith would later say. She saw the man underneath. Their connection was instant, electric, undeniable. Both had known loneliness at the top. Both had wrestled with the emptiness of applause. For the first time in years, Keith felt seen. He began to write differently, gentler, more hopeful. The songs no longer came from pain, but from the possibility of healing. Love for him became both muse and medicine. But the past doesn't vanish just because the future looks beautiful. As their romance deepened, his addiction shadowed him like a jealous ghost. Even as he fell in love, he was still falling apart. But when Nicole looked at him, he saw a version of himself that might still be saved. She gave me the courage, she said later, to stop surviving and start living. By the time they married in 2006, Keith Urban was standing at the crossroads of heaven and hell, one hand holding a guitar, the other holding redemption. The year was 2006, and Sydney glowed like a cathedral built for love. The world's eyes turned to St. Patrick's Estate, where candlelight flickered against sandstone walls and violins sang beneath the stars. Keith Urban waited at the altar, hands trembling, heart thundering, as Nicole Kidman, radiant in lace, her face alight with quiet faith, walked down the aisle. Their wedding wasn't just a union. It was a prayer answered. Two souls battered by fame and healed by tenderness were finally home. When he kissed her, it felt less like a ceremony and more like absolution. In the years that followed, life seemed to unfold like a song written in a major key. Keith's album Love, Pain, and the Whole Crazy Thing dropped like a heartbeat in perfect time. Critics called it his masterpiece, a blend of confession and triumph. His songs weren't just hits, they were stories stitched from scars. Stupid Boy, You Look Good in My Shirt, Once in a Lifetime. Every lyric felt like a man trying to make peace with himself. On stage, he became unstoppable, the kind of performer who made every crowd feel like a congregation. The world saw the charm,
the energy, the swagger. What they didn't see were the prayers whispered backstage before every show, the tremors in his hands, the constant battle to stay steady. Nicole's career, too, soared into a different stratosphere. Her performances in Moulin Rouge, The Hours, Australia, and Rabbit Hole painted her as Hollywood's porcelain storm, fragile yet fierce. But beneath the glamour, she was grounded in something real. In Nashville, she found peace. She found him. Their home was filled with music, laughter, and the rhythm of family. On Sundays, she'd sit barefoot on the porch while Keith strummed his guitar, their daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, dancing in the grass. They were no longer just stars. They were parents, partners, pilgrims of ordinary joy. But love under a microscope is never simple. Fame is a double-edged mirror. It reflects beauty and distorts truth. Keith was touring almost constantly. Nicole was filming across continents. Their schedules became tides, their connections stretched thin across oceans and time zones. They called every day, sent letters, left voice messages that began with, "I miss you," and ended with silence. Love, Keith said once, isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up even when you're exhausted. Then, just 4 months after their wedding, the headlines came. Keith Urban enters rehab. The words hit the world like thunder. It wasn't a relapse of weakness, but a cry for help. The weight of expectation, the fear of losing control, it had become too much. Nicole didn't leave. She ran toward him. She visited quietly, shielding him from gossip, refusing interviews. When asked why she stayed, she simply said, "Because love doesn't run." He emerged months later, sober, humbled, but not broken.
Friends noticed before the public did. At dinner parties, Keith would talk about his daughters with glowing pride, about new songs, about recovery, but rarely about them. Nicole, always graceful, would smile and say, "We're both very busy," which in Hollywood was often code for something deeper. Yet even then, neither of them let bitterness touch their names. There was still respect, admiration, a fragile thread of devotion that refused to break, but it was stretched thin. Then came the whispers. Are they drifting apart? Has fame finally caught up? Keith was seen alone at award shows. Nicole skipped tours. The tabloids wrote their scripts of speculation, but the truth was far quieter. Two good people trying to hold on to something that fame had slowly rewritten. "Marriage isn't a promise that time will never change you," Keith said once in a reflective interview. "It's the hope that you'll keep changing together." But change, as they had learned, doesn't always follow the same rhythm. Keith found solace in music, not the loud, fiery anthems of youth, but in stripped-down acoustic sessions, songs of stillness and surrender. His lyrics turned confessional again. We were, parallel line, everybody hurts. They weren't commercial, they were cathartic. Nicole, meanwhile, dove deeper into her craft, losing herself in characters that mirrored her own introspection. Her performance in Big Little Lies, raw, haunted, painfully human, felt like art imitating life. In the quiet corners of their world, both began to realize that love doesn't always die with thunder. Sometimes it simply exhales. The same intensity that had drawn them together, that wild, consuming spark, had mellowed into something gentler, more distant. They weren't enemies. They weren't even estranged. They were simply evolving into separate selves. Keith, now in his mid-50s, spoke more often about acceptance than romance. He said, "Love changes, and when it does, you have two choices. You can fight to make it what it was, or You can love it enough to let it become what it needs to be. It was an answer that carried neither regret nor relief, just peace. By 2023, the silence became impossible to ignore. The public noticed fewer joint appearances, fewer interviews, fewer photographs of hands intertwined. They weren't hiding, they were simply existing in a new truth. In one rare interview, Nicole was asked directly if they were still together. She smiled, eyes glistening, and said, "He will always be my family. That's all I'll ever say." It was the kind of answer that both ended and honored a story. For Keith, that word family became sacred. He wrote about it, sang about it, built his days around it. The tragedy was not a collapse, but a transformation. The slow, aching beauty of letting go with dignity. There was no villain, no betrayal, no grand finale. Just two souls who had walked as far together as they could, each grateful for the road they had shared. To the world, it might have looked like an ending, but to Keith, it was something else. A bittersweet chorus of closure. A song without a final note. Some loves aren't meant to last forever in the same form, but if they made you better, they never really end. And with that, he closed the door on a chapter that had made him both legend and man. Not with bitterness, but with grace. When the noise faded and the headlines found new names to feed on, Keith Urban remained quieter, steadier, different. The man who had once been defined by spotlights and sound checks began to crave something entirely new. Silence. Not emptiness, but stillness. For the first time since childhood, he could hear the air between the notes. He could breathe without applause. And in that stillness, he began to understand what all the pain had been trying to teach him. He spoke gently when asked about Nicole. He said, "We walked together through a lot of fire. And sometimes walking out of the fire doesn't mean walking away from each other. It just means you've learned what the flames were trying to show you." His words weren't rehearsed. They were lived. In his late 50s, Keith had stopped running from himself. He no longer needed to be the perfect husband, the flawless artist, the reformed addict. He only needed to be human. In interviews, he began to share pieces of his private battle, not with alcohol anymore, but with his own expectations. When you're young, you think success will fix everything. Then you get it, and it amplifies everything instead. It makes your fears louder, your insecurities sharper. For years, he had thought love would complete him. Now he understood, love was never meant to complete anyone. It was meant to reveal who you were before the world told you who to be. The truth, he finally admitted, was not scandal, not sorrow, but serenity. Not the end of love, but its transformation. The boy who once dreamed of Nashville found something far greater than fame or forgiveness. He found stillness. And in that stillness, Keith Urban remains, not as an idol, not as a myth, but as a man who turned his wounds into music, his silence into peace, and his love into something that will never stop singing. The crowd was already on its feet before the last chord faded. But Keith Urban didn't bow. He simply stood there, the guitar hanging loose at his side, sweat glistening like light on water. His eyes scanned the sea of faces, thousands of them, waiting for him to say something, anything. But for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to prove. The spotlight warmed his skin, and he realized
how long he had lived inside it. The stage had been his sanctuary, his battlefield, his confessional. But tonight, it felt different. It felt like closure. He smiled, small and unguarded, and then leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking, "for listening to my life." The crowd erupted, but Keith barely heard them. He was somewhere else, back in Cobbletree, a barefoot kid strumming an old guitar, believing that sound could save him. He had been right. It did. It always had. At 57, Keith Urban had become the quiet man behind the legend. The edges of his fame had softened, but the glow within him burned steady. He had walked through addiction, adoration, marriage, loss, and rediscovery, and somehow came out not jaded, but grateful. He no longer called what happened with Nicole a heartbreak. He called it a season. He said, "Some people think love ends when it changes, but love doesn't die. It evolves into memory, into gratitude." They still spoke often. They still laughed about old moments, still celebrated milestones with their daughters. Sometimes they were seen together, smiling, not pretending. To the public, it looked ambiguous. To them, it was peace. They had rewritten the meaning of forever. In his final tour, before taking a long hiatus, he ended every show with a song that didn't exist on any album. It was just him and his guitar. No lights, no drums. He called it "Still Here." The lyrics were simple, almost fragile. "I've broken in half just to learn how to bend. I've lost what I loved just to love it again. And if the world forgets my name or my song, I'll still be here, where I've belonged all along." Each night when he sang those words, the audience fell into reverent silence. There was no roar, no scream, no frenzy. Just the collective heartbeat of people who understood, who had lost, endured, and forgiven themselves too. When the final show ended, Keith didn't announce a farewell. He simply walked off stage, handed his guitar to a crew member, and disappeared into the darkness behind the curtains. Outside, the Nashville night waited, soft,